In the fall of 1967, a boy named Curtis Whitfield ran the 4 blocks home from school in Birmingham, Alabama, not because he was in trouble, but because he'd caught the smell of supper drifting out the kitchen window a full block before he even reached his own front porch. His mother never announced what was cooking. She never had to. Every kid on that street could tell you, by smell alone, exactly whose mother was making what that night. And Curtis's house on a Thursday meant one thing everybody on the block would have traded their own dinner to get an invitation to. Word traveled fast in a neighborhood like that. By the time Curtis made it to his own front steps, 2 of his cousins were already sitting on the porch waiting, having caught the same smell from 3 houses over. This is what I do. I go looking for the dishes that weren't just cheap, but genuinely beloved. The ones kids didn't tolerate, they flat out begged for. Before we're through, you'll hear about a Friday night ritual that didn't involve a stove at all. A sandwich built from nothing but bread, mayonnaise, and a piece of fruit, and a dish so ordinary that almost nobody guesses it takes the top spot on this entire list. My name is Uncle Elijah, and this is 20 cheap dishes black mothers made in the 1960s that kids genuinely begged for. None of these needed a special occasion to show up on the table, and none of them cost much more than pocket change. But every single one of them earned real, honest excitement from a house full of children. Starting at the bottom. Number 20. Peanut butter and syrup sandwiches. Peanut butter spread thick across a slice of bread, drizzled generously with cane syrup or molasses, and folded closed. It cost almost nothing. A spoonful of peanut butter and a splash of syrup a family already had on hand, and it hit exactly the sweet, salty, sticky combination that made a kid ask for a second one before finishing the first. Mothers reached for it on afternoons when there wasn't time or ingredients for anything more involved, and children rarely noticed it was a fallback rather than a planned treat. Folded over once and pressed flat, it traveled well in a coat pocket too, which made it just as popular as an after-school snack as it was an actual lunch. Number 19. Banana and mayonnaise sandwiches. Sliced banana laid across white bread thickly spread with mayonnaise, pressed together into something that sounds strange to modern ears but was a genuine Southern staple for decades. The combination worked because the salty richness of the mayonnaise balanced the banana's sweetness in a way kids couldn't quite explain but never stopped requesting. It cost next to nothing, since bananas and a jar of mayonnaise were about as cheap as groceries came, and it required zero cooking, which made it a favorite for mothers assembling a quick lunch between chores. Purists insisted the bread had to be soft, white bread and nothing else, and plenty of grown adults today will still tell you, without a trace of embarrassment, exactly why that particular detail matters. Number 18. Popcorn and Kool-Aid. On plenty of Friday nights, dinner wasn't a stove-cooked meal at all. It was a big bowl of popcorn, popped fresh on the stovetop and salted heavy, alongside a pitcher of bright red or purple Kool-Aid mixed thick with sugar. This wasn't laziness. It was a genuine ritual, a signal that the week was over and a small treat was coming, even when money was tight. A single box of popcorn kernels and a 10-cent packet of Kool-Aid mix could turn Friday into the most anticipated night of the entire week for a house full of children. Some families paired it with whatever came on the television that night, turning an already inexpensive dinner into a full evening's entertainment that cost next to nothing beyond the popcorn itself. Number 17. Hot dogs and rice. Sliced hot dogs, browned in a skillet and stirred into a pot of rice along with a can of tomatoes or a splash of ketchup, turning 2 of the cheapest items in the entire kitchen into a dinner that felt like an actual meal. A single package of hot dogs, stretched across a full pot of rice, could feed a family of 5 or 6 without anyone walking away hungry. Kids loved it specifically because it tasted like a cookout, even on a random Tuesday when there was no cookout happening anywhere near that kitchen. A little extra ketchup stirred in at the end usually settled any argument at the table about whether it needed more sauce, since the dish itself never took more than a few minutes to finish. Number 16. Pigs in a blanket. Hot dogs or sausage links wrapped in a simple biscuit dough and baked until golden, small enough to eat with one hand and satisfying enough to count as real dinner. A single package of hot dogs, stretched with a batch of homemade biscuit dough, could turn into 2 or 3 dozen of these, more than enough for a family with several children and a couple of hungry neighbors who happened to be over that evening. They traveled well too, wrapped in wax paper for a school lunch the next day. Kids especially loved helping roll the dough around each hot dog, which meant this particular dinner often turned into a small kitchen event rather than something a mother made entirely on her own. Number 15. Fried Spam and Grits. Sliced spam, seared hard in a skillet until the edges turned dark and slightly crisp, served alongside a bowl of hot buttered grits. Spam had become a genuine pantry staple by the 1960s, prized for needing no refrigeration until opened and costing far less than any fresh cut of meat at the counter. Its salty, dense flavor paired naturally with the mild creaminess of grits, and kids who grew up on this combination often requested it specifically over fresh bacon or sausage, simply because that's the flavor they'd come to associate with a good morning. A single can, sliced thin, could stretch across breakfast for the entire family, with maybe 1 or 2 slices left over for a sandwich later that same day. Number 14. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. A slice of cheese melted between 2 pieces of buttered bread, fried in a skillet until golden, served alongside a bowl of tomato soup made from a can. This combination became a genuine national favorite throughout the decade, and Black households were no exception, leaning on it specifically because a single loaf of bread, a block of cheese, and 1 can of soup could stretch across an entire family's lunch for almost nothing. Dipping the sandwich straight into the soup was, for most kids, non-negotiable. A rainy afternoon and this exact combination went together so naturally that some mothers said they could set a clock by how quickly their children asked for it the moment the weather turned. Number 13. Cornbread and syrup. A warm wedge of cornbread, split open and drenched in cane syrup until it soaked all the way through, sometimes finished with a pat of butter melting into the syrup itself. This wasn't dessert, and it wasn't quite breakfast either. It was whatever a mother needed it to be that day. Filling and sweet enough that kids rarely questioned why cornbread was suddenly showing up outside of dinner. A single pan of cornbread, baked for 1 meal, often got a second life this way the following morning. It was one of the simplest tricks in the whole kitchen, but it worked every single time, turning a leftover side dish into something a kid would specifically ask for by name. Number 12. Jelly biscuits. Warm, freshly baked biscuits split open and spread generously with whatever jelly or preserves a family had put up the summer before. Blackberry, fig, or peach, depending on what grew nearby. It cost almost nothing beyond the flour and lard already in the pantry, since the jelly itself had usually been canned for free from a backyard tree or a roadside patch months earlier. Kids treated a fresh batch of jelly biscuits like a genuine treat, even though the ingredients behind it were about as basic as any kitchen could offer. The particular jelly on hand changed with the season, which meant a family might go through blackberry in the summer and fig by early fall, each one treated like its own small event when the jar finally got opened. A biscuit split open while it was still steaming hot mattered more than most people realized, since the warmth alone was enough to melt the jelly into the crumb before a single bite was even taken. Number 11. Tuna melts. Canned tuna mixed with mayonnaise, piled onto bread, topped with a slice of cheese, and broiled or fried until the cheese turned bubbly and golden. A single can of tuna, stretched with mayonnaise and bread, could feed several kids a filling lunch for only a few cents a plate. The melted cheese made all the difference for picky eaters who otherwise turned their noses up at plain tuna salad, turning an ordinary pantry staple into something that felt like a genuine treat. Broiled until the cheese browned in spots rather than just melted flat, it earned a crunch on top that plenty of kids considered the best part of the whole sandwich. Now, it's worth pausing here on something worth remembering about this whole list. None of these dishes were fancy, and none of them cost very much at all. But that's exactly why kids love them. Children rarely measure a meal by its price tag. They measure it by how it tastes, how it smells, filling up the house, and whether it shows up on the table on the night they were hoping for it most. A mother stretching a tight grocery budget in the 1960s learned quickly which cheap dishes actually earned genuine excitement from her children, and she leaned on those dishes again and again, not just because they were affordable, but because they worked. There was no shame in repeating a winning dinner twice in 1 week if it meant clean plates and no complaints at the table. Keep that in mind as we move further down this list. Number 10. Chili. Ground beef, browned and simmered with canned tomatoes, kidney beans, and a heavy hand of chili powder until it thickened into something rich enough to serve over rice or alongside a wedge of cornbread. A single pound of ground beef, stretched with a couple of cans of beans, could feed a large family for 2 nights running, tasting even better as leftovers the second time around. Kids loved it specifically because it felt like an event. A big pot simmering all afternoon, filling the whole house with a smell that built anticipation long before dinner was actually served. A little extra cornbread on the side, broken up right into the bowl, was how plenty of families made sure not a single drop of that pot went uneaten. Some households added a can of corn or a spoon of sugar to round out the heat, small personal touches that turned one simple recipe into as many versions as there were mothers making it. Number 9. Sloppy Joes, ground beef, browned and simmered in a sweet, tangy tomato sauce, spooned generously onto a soft hamburger bun. This dish became a genuine national sensation throughout the 1960s, and it earned its popularity honestly. A single pound of ground beef, stretched with ketchup, brown sugar, and a can of tomato sauce, could feed a family of 6 without anyone noticing how little actual meat was on their plate. The messier it got, the more kids seemed to enjoy it, which mothers quickly learned to accept rather than fight. A stack of napkins on the table became as much a part of Sloppy Joe night as the dish itself, and everyone at the table understood exactly why before the first bite was even taken. Number 8. Spaghetti with meat sauce. Ground beef, simmered in a simple tomato sauce with onion and garlic, served over a full pot of spaghetti noodles. A single pound of ground beef, stretched across an entire box of pasta, could genuinely feed a family of 6 or more for less than $1 total, making it one of the most economical dinners any household could put together. Kids requested it constantly, in part because it was one of the few dinners in weekly rotation that let them use a fork the wrong way and get away with it. A sprinkle of powdered Parmesan from a can, if the budget allowed for it that week, was treated by most kids as the finishing touch that made the whole plate feel special. Number 7. Dirty rice. Rice cooked down with finely chopped chicken livers or gizzards, onion, celery, and bell pepper, seasoned heavy until the whole pot turned a deep, speckled brown. This dish stretched the cheapest parts of the chicken into a dish substantial enough to serve as the entire meal on its own, no side dishes required. Kids who might have turned their noses up at a plate of plain chicken livers rarely objected once those same livers disappeared into a pot of well-seasoned rice, proof that presentation mattered just as much as the ingredients themselves. A heavy hand with black pepper and a little hot sauce stirred in at the table let each kid adjust their own plate to taste, which cut down on complaints before they ever started. Number 6. Red beans and rice. Dried red beans, simmered low and slow with a smoked ham hock or a little sausage until they turned thick and creamy, served spooned generously over a bed of white rice. A single pound of dried beans could stretch across several dinners for a large family, and the dish only improved with time, tasting richer on the second and third day than it had on the first. Many households leaned on this dish, specifically on Mondays, a tradition that let a pot simmer quietly all day while the rest of the week's chores got handled around it. Kids who grew up on it often say, decades later, that the smell of a pot of red beans simmering is the single fastest way to bring back an entire childhood in one breath. A splash of hot sauce and a side of fried cornbread rounded the whole plate out into something that felt, despite its simplicity, like a genuine occasion rather than just another Monday. Plenty of families kept the pot on the back burner all day long, so anyone who walked through that kitchen already knew exactly what was coming for dinner hours before it was actually served. Number 5. Chicken and dumplings. A whole chicken, simmered until tender in a rich broth, joined by thick, hand-rolled dumplings dropped straight into the pot to cook until soft and pillowy. A single chicken, stretched this way with flour and broth, could feed a family far larger than the chicken alone ever could on its own. Kids loved fishing through their bowl for the biggest dumpling they could find, and mothers who made this dish well were known throughout the neighborhood for it, their recipe requested at nearly every potluck they attended. Getting the dumplings right took real practice. Too thick and they turned gummy. Too thin and they simply dissolved into the broth before anyone got a proper bite. Number 4. Fried chicken wings. Sold for a fraction of the price of breasts or thighs, chicken wings were seasoned heavy, dredged in flour, and fried until deeply golden and crisp. A whole package of wings cost only a small fraction of what a full cut-up chicken did, which made them a genuine bargain for a mother trying to put real fried chicken on the table without the cost of the whole bird. Kids treated wing night as something close to a celebration, gnawing every last bit of meat off the bone before asking, almost without fail, for just one more. A wing, small enough to finish in a few bites, meant kids could work their way through several pieces without anyone at the table feeling like they'd gotten shorted on portion size. Now, before we close out this list, it's worth naming one more thing. A meal didn't have to be expensive to feel like love on a plate, and in a lot of these households, the cheapest dishes were often the ones served with the most obvious pride. A mother frying a pan of wings or stirring a pot of dirty rice wasn't apologizing for what she couldn't afford. She was working with exactly what she had and making sure her children felt like it was more than enough. That's really the thread running through this entire list, and it's the reason so many of these dishes still get made today, long after money stopped being the reason behind them. Keep that in mind as we finish this list. Number 3. Chicken pot pie. Leftover chicken, carrots, peas, and potatoes, folded into a rich gravy and baked beneath a simple, flaky crust until golden on top. This dish let a mother turn Sunday's leftover chicken into an entirely new dinner by midweek, stretching a single bird across 2 completely different meals without anyone feeling like they were eating the same thing twice. Kids loved cutting into that first bite of crust and watching the steam rise up out of the filling underneath, a small bit of theater that made an ordinary leftover feel like something new. Nobody at the table ever seemed to mind that the whole dish started life as Sunday's picked over chicken, which was, in its own quiet way, exactly the point. Number 2. Macaroni and cheese. Elbow macaroni, boiled tender and baked beneath a rich, sharp layer of melted cheese until the top turned golden and slightly crisp at the edges. Built from little more than pasta, cheese, butter, and milk, this dish cost only pennies per serving and yet consistently ranked among the most requested dinners in nearly every household that made it. Some mothers baked it plain. Others layered in a few extra eggs to make it richer. But almost every single version earned the exact same reaction at the table. A plate cleaned faster than almost anything else on this entire list. The crispy, slightly browned edge along the sides of the pan was, for a lot of kids, the single most fought-over part of the entire dish. And number 1, not the most impressive dish on this list, and not the most complicated to make, fried chicken. A whole chicken, cut into pieces, seasoned, dredged in flour, and fried in a skillet until the outside turned deep golden and impossibly crisp. Chicken was, and still is, one of the more affordable meats a family could buy, which meant fried chicken wasn't actually the luxury it often felt like at the table. It showed up on Sunday tables across the country specifically because it managed to feel like a genuine celebration while costing barely more than most of the other dishes on this entire list. I put it at number 1 not because it was the most special, but because more kids, across more decades and more households, begged for this exact dish than anything else. The plainest kind of magic a mother could pull off with a hot skillet and a little flour. The sound of that first piece hitting hot grease was, for plenty of families, the surest sign that something worth waiting for was finally on its way. So tell me, which of these did your mother actually make? And which one would you still beg for today if you could? I read every comment, and half of what ends up in this journal comes straight from families who lived through every single one of these dinners. If this kind of history matters to you, do something small about it. Like this video, subscribe to the journal, and I'll keep pulling these recipes up out of kitchens the history books never bothered to write about. Because every dish on this list says the same true thing. A mother didn't need a big budget to make her children feel like the luckiest kids on the block. She just needed a hot stove, a little imagination, and enough love to make even the cheapest meal taste like a celebration. If your mouth is already watering thinking about one of these, that's the whole point. Some things really do stay with you for 50 years or more.